Hello everyone, Steven here with Rabbit Hobbies. It's been far too long since I painted some Battletech minis, and today we're going bold. We are going neon pink, bright electric blue. We are going full-on synthwave chaos on the battlefield. Basically imagine a 1980s arcade threw-up all over the inner sphere. I'm going to show you how to make your mechs pop like a cyberpunk fever dream. First of all, what even is synthwave? Is it a music genre? Is it an aesthetic? Is it a lifestyle? What are we talking about here? Synthwave is a vibe. It's a musical style and a visual language rolled into one. It captures the neon-soaked optimism of the 1980s and refracts it through a retro-future lens. Synthwave is what the 80s thought the future would look and sound like, where chrome androids, glowing grids, and analog synths paint a future that never quite existed but feels strangely familiar. This style can be found everywhere in the video game industry, with AAA titles like Cyberpunk 2077 fully embracing this aesthetic. And the number of indie games with this vibe is just staggering. And really, it's not hard to see why. It's such a striking color palette. But none of that works without the soundscape. All of this color and atmosphere doesn't exist in a vacuum. It pulses, it hums, it moves, and that movement comes from music. Synthwave feels like driving into a neon sunset that never ends, and that can make you feel nostalgic for a future that you never lived. Bands like Daft Punk and Nightclub helped bring synthwave into the mainstream, and now that neon-soaked sound is bleeding into all kinds of other music. Hollywood is all in on this aesthetic too. I mean, arguably they created it. The Tron films really show how sound and visuals together can build a world, not just a movie. I feel like this is the movie series that really made synthwave what it is today. Truly iconic. And speaking of iconic, Stranger Things reintroduced a generation to these neon-soaked visuals and analog synths, helping popularize this style beyond just music. Stranger Things was a cultural phenomenon, and there's a whole new generation of young people now who are nostalgic for this era they never lived in. It was the whole package, it was the vibe, it was the aesthetic, it was the music. And very importantly, the color, which leads me into my next topic, which is synthwave color palettes. A synthwave color palette is built on high-contrast neon tones against deep, darker backgrounds. Electric pinks, hot magentas, and glowing purples pair with cyan and electric blues. The colors need to feel luminous, almost backlit, evoking neon signs, laser grids, and sunset horizons. The hues don't matter as much as the saturation and luminosity, bright contrasts, and subtle gradients. I have many options for color here because it's more about how I use the color. My goal is to nail the vibe. And to that end, I'm not just going to pick one color scheme, I'm going to go with 4. When all said and done, let me know in the comments what is your favorite scheme from the bunch. Also, let me know if you tried this out yourself. I've got this whole box of mercenaries here, and they feel like perfect fodder for this cyberpunk experiment. But of all these minis, who do I pick? There's so many oddballs in this box. I decided to go with one of each weight class. For my light mech, I decided to run with the Firefly. This light mech is surprisingly durable and punchy for its size, leading to some people calling it a pocket medium. It comes equipped with 3 medium lasers, an LRM-5, and an AMS. It's a little slow with a top speed of only 86 kph, but it makes up for it in durability. It also has decent jumping capability, which makes sense considering it looks like it should be able to fly. Alright, for my medium mech, I picked the Chameleon. This easy-to-pilot mech was designed as a training mech. It comes equipped with a large laser, 2 medium lasers, and 3 small lasers. It also has a pair of machine guns for dealing with infantry. It's relatively quick for a medium with a top speed of 97 kph. I don't know if it's what you call a good mech, but I like it.
I just think they're neat.
Let me know what you think in the comments. Alright, for my heavy, I picked the Ostsol. Ostsol? How the f*** do you say... Man, I hate saying that word. Alright, I'm good. We're just going to go ahead and call him Dave. For a 60-ton mech, Dave is kind of packing some heat. He's got 2 large lasers and 4 medium lasers. But Dave is also kind of a dick. 2 of these are rear-facing. So although it kind of limits his alpha strike potential, good luck sneaking up on him if you're a light mech. Dave is also pretty quick for a heavy, clocking in at 86.4 kilometers per hour. Last but not least, and to round out our lance, we have the Devastator. This 100-ton monster is coming loaded for bear at extreme long range. Not only packing 2 Gauss rifles, it also has 2 PPCs. To complement this armament at medium range, it has 4 medium lasers. 2 of these are on the torso, 1 on the head, and 1 is rear-facing. Now, a single medium laser doesn't sound like much of a deterrent against backstabbing. However, the Devastator has a really cool trick up its sleeve. You see, those hyper-extending actuators that it carries allows its Gauss rifles to fire from the rear arc. Good luck to any mech that wants to take 2 Gauss rifles and a medium laser to the face. So while it is really slow, it's an assault mech, its massive arcs of fire and extreme threat range make this thing a problem. Alright, so here we have my lance. We have our Firefly, our Chameleon, Devastator, and Dave. First I used some poster tack to slap on some painting handles. Then I sprayed them with some Stynol Res primer through my airbrush. By the way, if you're interested in any of my tools or materials, there are affiliate links in the video description. If you use those links, it helps us make more content like this for the channel. Alright, now that our primer is dry, let's get to work on Dave. I'll be using Pro Acryl from Monument Hobbies Blue, Dark Hot Pink, and Pink. Always some flow improver first. I decided to do my shadow color first, in this case it's blue. See, for Dave I'm going with this kind of color fade here. I'm going to hit him with the blues from the underside and then the pinks from above. The blue will give me kind of a chromatic shadow. By the way, I'm not going to show you changing my paint every time in the airbrush because it gets kind of tedious. Just know that every time I do it, it always goes flow improver, then paint, then water as needed. Alright, so I sprayed Dave from above with a dark hot pink. I did this as basically a zenithal highlight. I couldn't make the angle too steep, otherwise I would blow over my blue. Next, I just added in some of the pink into my cup. Just mixing as I go. Then I hit it again for a little bit of a highlight. I think this gradient turned out pretty nice. Next up is the Chameleon. For this shadow color I used dark magenta. For the highlights I used dark turquoise and turquoise. By the way, don't shy away from using a real color in your shadows. Even if you're not trying to do some kind of gradient like this or, synthwave, adding a little color to your shadows really adds some visual interest. Next up, I added the turquoise. Almost immediately, I started to really like how this model was looking. I'm considering using this 2-tone color scheme for my Eldar for Warhammer 40k. I then used some light turquoise for the highlight. This is the overall look I'm going for here. Magenta undertones and shadows with this light blue highlight. Next up, I did the Firefly. For him, I decided to go with green undertones and a warm yellow up to bismuth yellow highlight. This color made me think of the Green Bay Packers.
Wisconsin cheese!
Really, being from Seattle, it was more the Seattle Supersonics, but rest in peace. Then I hit him with some of that bismuth yellow for a highlight, and man, that's a bright paint. Alright, last up for the spray booth is the Devastator. For him, I decided to go with a Tequila Sunrise. Some bold Pyral Red and dark magenta for the bottom. Some orange red for the midtone. Some orange and golden yellow for the highlight. And to really punch it up, some of that radioactive looking bismuth yellow. Now, there was a lot of wet mixing in this process. First was about a 50-50 mix of the bold Pyral Red and dark magenta. This I used to hit the underside and the bottom of the feet. Next came the magenta and the orange. I did this slightly higher on the leg to overlap but not cover the previous layer. Next came a layer of pure orange. This time I'm only hitting the very tops of the legs, but I'm covering all the torso and head. Now you can really see the Tequila Sunrise effect start to come together. Next came pure golden yellow. This really popped out the brightness on the model. Finally, the last step is some of that insanely bright bismuth yellow. This paint is something else. Now we're on to brushwork. I'm going to use some dark hot pink and pink to add some highlights to Dave. He's looking pretty good with his two-tone magenta and blue, but I want to give him some pretty significant edge highlights. For this, you have to use a brush. You're not doing this with an airbrush. You need a brush with a really nice fine point. It doesn't need to be a particularly small brush, but it needs to be able to hold a really nice sharp tip. First, some of the dark hot pink, and then some of the pink. Now using the edge of the tip, I'm just going around and highlighting each edge. This takes forever. Luckily, with the magic of editing, I can show you this whole process in hyperspeed. This technique really makes all the edges pop. It's not realistic, it's more stylistic. Like for these highlights on the leg, I really should be using something with some more blue mixed in. But to get that synthwave looking contrast, I'm keeping with the magenta highlights. It's way more realistic looking up on the arms. But I'm not going for realistic here. I just want it to look cool. After a while staring this close, I needed to use some magnification. This really helped me pick out all these tiny edges. And with some time and patience, this is how we ended up looking. Definitely seeing more of the synthwave aesthetic coming out. Next, I used a little bit of dry brushing just to tie it all together. Now make sure that your dry brush is not completely dry. That's how you end up with a chalky finish. Alright, I think Dave is looking pretty good. The lower parts of this mech are really starting to look kind of neon and glowing. Now besides Battletech, what other kind of minis would you use this for? I already said my Eldar army. I have a lot of ideas brewing now. I think this would look great on some Infinity models too. Alright, next up on deck is the Chameleon. He's already looking pretty striking, but I'm going to do my best with these edge highlights to try to get that same neon glowing effect. I decided to use turquoise and actually start with the dry brush stage this time. I figured this would help me visualize the edges better and pick them out. I think this was the right choice, much easier on my eyes too. Screw you, Dave. Alright, well that's a start, but maybe a little too conservative. I started to punch it up with some white blue. One thing I learned about working with dry brushing with colors that contain white is you gotta be extra careful to not get a chalky finish. I think this is about as far as I'm willing to go, and I think it looks pretty good at this stage. Alright, time for some more edge highlighting. Same process as with Dave. Just taking my time going all around the model, making sure I'm hitting every little edge. Edge highlighting really annoys me. In fact, in many projects I try and avoid it if I can. But for the aesthetic I'm going for here, it's mandatory. Sometimes you just gotta put in the work. Alright, eyes are failing me again. But I feel more motivated the more that I see the scheme come together. And after pushing through, here's what I'm left with. I think this chameleon is starting to look pretty dope. I think this might be my favorite of the four schemes. Alright, back to the Firefly. I decided to start by dry brushing some of that bismuth yellow. If you want to get some of that paint for yourself, it's from the Rogue Hobbies set. If you haven't checked out her channel, please do so. She's awesome. So first I dry brushed with the bismuth yellow, and then I added some pale yellow into the mix. Yup, confirmed. Dry brush first is the way to go. Alright, so the Firefly is looking pretty alright. While I have this mix out, I figured I may as well go ahead and work on the Devastator too. It makes sense since he's going to have yellow highlights too. Just did a little bit here just to make those edges pop. I'll have to edge highlight them later. Went back and finished off the whole long process of highlighting this Firefly. For some reason it felt more strange using yellow highlights on green, but I just went with it and trusted the process. At the end of the day, I felt he looked pretty good. I'm not the hugest fan of the yellow and green scheme. What do you guys think? Back to the Devastator to finish him up. I realized that I went a bit too white on that dry brush, so I went over it with a layer of the bismuth yellow and the warm yellow. And yeah, I think that was the right move. This guy's so big and there's just so many edges. I just had to take my time and go with the flow. Now for the upper body, I added in some more white. This really did a good job of picking out all those panel lines. At the end of the day, I think the results were pretty nice. I think the patience has paid off. I definitely can see myself using this Tequila Sunrise scheme again. Alright, time to break out my fidget palette and my favorite metallic paint. This fidget palette works really nice because once the paint dries, you can just pop it out. This Vallejo metal color paint is very, very shiny. I love the finish on it. But I don't use it on my wet palette because I don't like how it behaves when it gets too damp. But the coverage and finish is fantastic. Starting with Dave, I went around and painted all the guns. I also painted any vents or other interesting bits on the minis. This metallic paint is very thin to begin with, so I basically use it straight out of the pot almost. I come back in later with an oil wash almost every time I use this paint. That's going to help with darkening up all the panel lines as well. Alright, base coats and metals are done, now it's time for cockpits and lasers. Alright, first for large lasers and PPCs, I'm going with blues. I try to paint these kind of like gemstones. I set up my palette with dark gray blue, blue, and gray blue. For specular highlights, I add in some bold titanium white. First, a little base coat with the dark gray blue. I hit the PPCs on the Devastator. Take care of Dave's large lasers, and the one on the chameleon that you'll probably never see. Next for the blue, I use this to hit up the lower 2/3 of the lens. The effect I'm going for is kind of like these. Now these are so small you really can't be perfect with this, and it won't matter, it will look good. As we get smaller and smaller, it's time to bring the magnifiers out again. This time I'm just kind of lining the lower rim of the lens. I miss the days when my eyes were working. Here you can see the effect is starting to come together. To really sell the reflective effect, I put a tiny little specular highlight on each lens. This gives the illusion that the lenses are actually made of glass. I actually put gloss varnish at the very end as well. For the medium lasers, I do the same thing but with a green palette. Dark jade, green, and bright pale green. Same process as before, but just different colors. There are a lot more of these. Also the rear-facing ones. Medium lasers are the real workhorse of the Battletech universe. They just get the job done. Once again, that specular highlight of titanium white really sells the effect. Now for the small lasers on the chameleon, it's the same thing but with a palette of burgundy, red, and orange. Same process. I use orange to avoid getting it pink. I really like the way these small lasers turned out. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I decided to go with an orangey color scheme for the cockpits on Dave and the chameleon. I also already had some of this paint on my palette, so I just needed to add some burnt orange. I base coated the whole cockpit in a bit of this darker orange. I figured orange would be a nice contrast to the blues and magentas. I made sure that I fully base coated the entire cockpit first. Then I'm going to add in progressive layers of brighter orange. I'm going to be doing this as kind of a wet blend. When painting cockpits, I find don't stress over accidentally painting the struts. You can always paint the struts back in later. This kind of painting method is why I love using a wet palette. It's really helpful for establishing a nice gradient blend. Alright, looking pretty good. I think it's time to add some specular highlights. Going all the way to white. Sorry about the lack of focus here. I was more focused on not messing up my mini. Hopefully you see what I did. I'd call that a serviceable cockpit. Alright, back to Dave. A little bit more wet blending with the orange. I added in a bit of yellow. And then I went all the way up to pale yellow. Finally, a couple more specular highlights for that glint of glass. I found Dave's cockpit to be a little harder to paint. Everything about him is weird. So for the Devastator and Firefly cockpits, I used the same color palette I used for the large lasers. Same process as before. The Devastator cockpit was so small that I ended up painting over the struts. So I had to go back and paint them in. That's the great thing about painting minis. If you make a mistake, you can always go back and fix it. Alright, here's the finished Devastator cockpit. Alright, same process for the Firefly, it's just got a lot more real estate to work with. When painting cockpits, just take your time. If you don't like something, just paint it again. Over years of painting, I've learned not to get too frustrated with this kind of stuff. Alright, a few more specular highlights. And there we are. Not bad, right? I saw a couple spots where I went over the line, so I just kind of went back in with some pale yellow and fixed it. Alright, I'm calling that cockpit done. For a simple base, I slapped on some Vallejo earth texture. I really like this stuff. I feel like the size of the particulate works really well at Battletech scale. I kind of scoop it on with a big flat brush, and then I come in with a smaller brush to push the details around the feet. The stuff shrinks a bit when it dries, so I use a little bit more than I think I need. Alright, back to the brush for a little bit. We're going to rim our bases in black. I always do black for my base rims. I don't know about you guys. I used to do like a terrain color, like an earth color or a green. But black seems to go with everything. Alright, if you watched my Battletech videos before, you know that I have to go a little extra on my front facing. So to that end, I have to mask it all off with Tamiya tape and some silly putty. This time around, I'm going to go really bold with the airbrush. The silly putty and Tamiya tape is going to protect my work. By the way, if you want to learn more about using silly putty as a hobby tool, check out the video above. Alright, back in the spray booth, I started it off with some green. I used this as the base coat for my front facing. After that, for the first highlight, I added in some bright pale green. So it was already looking pretty bright. But what if I could go like neon with this? So I added in like a little undercoat highlight of bold titanium white. There's a reason for this. You see, fluorescent paints are really bright and intense, but they're also very transparent. And the white is going to help this paint really pop. So I decided to use Data System Glow from Warpaint's Fanatic. These fluorescent paints are intense. They also glow under a blacklight. Now it's time to unwrap them like presents. We can see the magic that the silly putty did, preserving all the work underneath. I think this turned out pretty great. It's a little muted on camera. In person, these are shockingly bright. Now I could have left these here at this level, but I'm going to add a little bit of grunge and weathering just to make them look lived in. Let me know what you think at the end of the video. Do you like them like this or after the oil wash? So I sealed them with some high gloss varnish through my airbrush. This will protect all the hard work underneath. You don't have to use a gloss varnish, but I like the way the capillary action works with the oil wash. So for my oil wash, I used ivory black. I mixed this in with some mineral spirits. If you want to see how to oil wash, I'll share a link in the video description. Or you can check out my video link above. Now this oil wash is going to run into all the recesses. It's going to give us some natural shading, and it's going to panel line this whole model for us. If I leave it all on, it's going to make the model look really grungy. But most of this I'm going to be taking off with a sponge later. Alright, next up it's Dave's turn. To be honest, this step kind of made me a little nervous. I didn't want to mute these down so much that they no longer feel like Synthwave. And even though I've done this 100 times before, there's always a little voice in the back of my head going, "You're gonna ruin it. You're gonna mess this up." Don't listen to that guy. He's a douchebag. Alright, just gotta let him dry.
2 hours later.
You have ruined everything!
Nah, I think we're good. Just gotta use some more mineral spirits and a makeup sponge. I think we got this. This is part of the magic of the oil wash. It's a reductive process, and the cleanup part is where everything amazing happens. Most of the wash that's settled on the top of the model is going to come off, but we're going to leave behind the wash in the recesses. I think it looks better. What do you think, before or after the wash? Alright, back to the spray booth again, this time with some matte varnish. Always remember to shake the ever-living crap out of your matte varnish. If you want your mechs to look glossy, you can do a gloss varnish or even like a satin varnish for this. But you definitely want a varnish that's going to seal in the underlayer of oil wash. Otherwise you risk it getting all over your hands if you handle it while it's curing for the next couple of weeks. Another optional step that I like to do is I go back in with a gloss varnish now on the cockpits, on the metal, and on the lenses. For me, this really helps sell the look of glass, but I think they look good matte finished as well. Alright, let me get Dave's nipple guns real quick. Actually, besides the Firefly, all my mechs have nipple guns. Weird. Alright, now just a few more finishing touches and we are ready to do the grand reveal. Alright, so this Firefly scheme started growing on me a bit. Still my least favorite out of the bunch. I put them all under a black light just to give us that neon vibe. Now I really like the way this chameleon turned out. The purple underside with the high contrast shadows. I will definitely be using this scheme in the future. And then there's Dave. He's growing on me. The blue underside is a little more subtle, but I think he looks great. The Devastator scheme I think is amazing. I could have gone harder with the magenta towards the bottom, but I love the way this turned out. Which one was your favorite? What do you think of the Synthwave? Should I do some more? Do you have an idea for a crazy color scheme? Leave it in the comments. Hey, and do me a favor, if you like what you're seeing on the channel, please give me a like and subscribe. Remember to hit that notification bell. The algorithm has gotten weird as of late. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching.
I just think they're neat.